Good evening. Um, the title of my presentation is Finding Self in the Spectacle, Unbecoming of a Cyborg. I begin with posing a few questions rather than giving answers on, are we human? Are we still, or were we ever, solipsistic, that is, believing that the self is all that exists? Are we human enough? In Hindu mythology, we have a concept of Manushya, and the humanism as Manushya. Are we then Manushya enough? Are we human enough according to the humanism norms? Were we ever human? Are we cyborgs then? Or are we post-human? Or were we always post-human? I'll be trying to break the dichotomies between mind, body, animal, human organism, machine, and understand how there is an unbecoming of cyborg going on. Being cyborg, by the great Haraway, cyborg is a condensed image of both imagination and material reality, the two joint centers structuring any possibility of historical transformation. Utopian tradition of imagining a world without gender. Now, she calls cyborgs as the interlinking of cybernetic and organism, an image which exists beyond reality and imagination, which is an amalgamation of the both. Cyborgs, she says, are not reverent. They do not come back and revere their fathers because, quote unquote, they are the illegitimate offsprings of militarism and patriarchal capitalism, not to mention state socialism, but illegitimate offsprings are never faithful to their origins, and thus they never revere their fathers. Cyborgs, according to her, the boundary between human and animal is breached. Animal, human, that is the organism and machine, is breached, and the physical and non-physical becomes very imprecise to her. This is a visual simulation of how the cyborg would have looked if not taking the a scientific part, but taking the animal and the human amalgamation. The middle two you see are the postmodern renditions of how a post-human or a cyborg would look like. The other two, the left one is the avatar of Vishnu called the Narsim, and then is the Hanuman, the deities of Hinduism, which have always been an amalgamation of animal and human. Christievan's subject and process is a very important theoretical angle because she talks a lot about how language is important in the becoming of a self. But she says that language is in itself a productive structure, a paradox, and any ideology that exists, may that be the myth, the ritual, the moral code, the art, they all exist as science systems. They have to signify, they're articulated like a language. But then what happens when the language becomes a code? It stops signifying anymore. What happens to the double articulation of signifier and signified is a question which we should dwell on. There's a power of continuum that she cites, she quotes from Bakhtin, who says there's a 0-1 relationship in language where one is the prohibition, the law, the God, the definition, the patriarchal definition we agree to. And 0-2 interval is where any carnivalesque narration exists, where a dialogue of becoming can exist, where a dialogism exists, according to what he says. The one has to be transgressed, but how does a self exist in its becoming when the language of science has been coded in a 0-1 message form itself, in a very masculinist form? Spectacle in the self is another concept by Kristeva, which I need not dwell because since 2 wonderful days we have been talking about how the self has become a spectacle in itself, and society has been acting like an anesthetic, which is the virtual anesthetic, and the desire to better the body to match this anesthetic has somehow intermingled with our desire to become a cyborg, where you have to breach the body. So what happens after decades of the idea of spectacle and cyborg when they amalgamate themselves? How do we see the body as a construction and the self in its being is a very important dichotomy. Cyber feminism came as a result of the virtual space. Although Haraway talks about her rather being a cyborg than a goddess, but I respectedly, I do not agree with her. Cyberspaces are coded very womb-like, very feminine. They're just waiting to be penetrated by the man. And after decades being in the cyberspace, we know that a man is so lustful of penetrating a woman's space, and vice versa. Wherever the gender breaks in the homosexuality, whatever is not the norm, the heteronormative man is so lustily waiting to penetrate that area, where She says that there are only deformed creatures who will be born in a cyborg form because the father is absent. But I question that the womb still remains. Here I have, there's an image of Patricia Piccinini's art where there's a deformed creature and the mother is hugging. So the idea of motherhood still exists in cyber feminism. A cyber robot is still somebody with breasts. How do we claim to breach the body when we still live in a cyber world where we are not fully women at all? We are just a simulation imitating the self in the accepted political scientific gesture. Being post-human is a rather computative term where the being, if I take to be the cyborg, with the post-human becomes an eternal becoming, because erasure of embodiment doesn't specify that it has happened. Self becomes is reduced to the information here. They say, why need the unnecessary flesh of the body when everything can be reduced to a computer disk of 0-1 information? That is actually the man's lust towards immortality. And every utterance, the Freudian utterance you see, is doubly encoded. When I talked about language as the code, now see, it is doubly encoded as a statement about the outside world and also the mirror reflecting the speaker's psyche. The amalgamation has converted us from an I to we of a blending of different identities together. Human beings are no more cyborgs. They do not have cybernetic limbs, but they themselves have to become intelligent machines, or the machines will replace us as the intelligent man. Machine and the self is important because machines are now advising how the self is to be constructed. Though we did talk about body breaching, but we never knew that the machine is going to replace the other. For a self is formed after the Oedipal and the mirror stages. And when computer becomes the other, it is taking the place of the phallic mother and the pre-Oedipal father. So it is very important to understand how the relationship of self happens to the world through a machine, which have become the tool, and tools are never neutral. So they have been fed by the patriarchal 0-1, by the continuum, and then we have been encoding and decoding in that continuum itself, where pattern and randomness dialectic is still maintained. Breaching every other dichotomy, we are still trapped in a pattern and randomness and a presence and absence of language code. Information we need, but we do not need meaning. So we need a signal, but no message. Post-human is claimed to be a post-gender world. While I do not really see that happening, but a post-gender world is where a cyborg becomes a creature which has no origin story, which is not born, thus it does not die, the ideal immortality, and it is not it does not have a phallic mother. It is not an ultimate self which is united at last from all dependency of man in space. Now cyborg skips the step of original unity, so you will not be able to trace him. But do we actually ever go beyond gender? Because every image of a post-human you would want to swipe through internet, type post-human images, and the arts related are very masculine superman kind of images, the machos, the as a stronger, faster man you can become. So what happens to the woman, to the non-heteronormative creatures, to the transgenders, to the homosexuals existing in this post-gender world? Or is this only fluidity so the man could become more man? Trans body, transhuman, transcending meaning, if that is the entire goal, then again the image, which the left is a very postmodern gallery of arts representing how we transcend the bodies and the genders. On the right side is a Hindu mythological concept of Ardhanareshwar, where Shiv and Shakti, the feminine and the masculine entities of the entire world, they combine, not to be two bodies which are fused, but an amalgamation of the two bodies which absolutely break the breach the bodies, the embodiment, the idea of embodiment. I left you with this so that I could take you back to the Upanishads and all the quotations that are here. Do they absolute sound? Are they replicating what has been taught of the post-human to us till date? Like the jiva, it consists of a material body, the principle of breath. All these are organized by Vigyan or Buddhi. Buddhi is intelligence, Vigyan is knowledge. Basis of individuality or ego is intelligence, which draws around mind, life, and body, is what the Upanishads say. They say the universal self is the supreme being sustaining the others. While you may reject it as a concept of being a god, but then whatever the information we are feeding in a micro disk, in a computer disk, that has to be stored and controlled by somebody, replacing that to the universal self. Gone. Man is more than what he knows about himself. The self-transcending capacity of the Jeev is the proof that it is not limited entity that it takes itself to be. For a Manushya to accept moksha, immortality, that is again for the human to become a post-human by transcending the mohamaya, the bodily entrapments, is again what it advises. What we are depends on what we have been. The plurality of individual souls, which we talked about again in the becoming of post-human, that we become, I become we, to become post-human, that is again what they are calling it. And they also tell you that the individuals do not resolve themselves in the universal absolute, and the released individuals who release themselves on this manifested world, they are known as the self. Finally, the construction of self that they tell you is again a very post-human concept, a transcending the bodily, the human mohamaya, the entrapments, the manifestations of a material body, is the self and not the incarnation or anything. If I leave you with that, then who are we? Are we really going forward or going backwards towards a society that has been feeding us with the concepts of first the God, then the law, then the money, then the man? Are we again in a chaos of scientific patriarchal construction where we are surrendering too early? Are we human? Are we post-human? Or are we just the guys, the ghosts, the absences, which are trying to navigate our ways through the constructed meanings of patriarchy at all? Thank you.